Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Planet Zoo. We are back in Arcadia with our first episode of the new year and the second to last episode in what I'm calling Season 1. This episode we will be doing a little bit of exhibit development to the right of your screen just after our entrance. I've got a little bit of a walkthrough planned and then we're going to be building a little campsite for our guests. Obviously we don't have hotels or anything yet, but I'm trying to get some advanced prep in the event that eventually we get some sort of resort facility from the devs as they continue to release updates to the game. And yeah, that's it. The final episode of this season will simply be a tour. And there's going to be two types of tour. You're going to be able to get like a no commentary, short tour of everything that we've done. And then I'll be doing a more feature-length version where I talk about everything that we've done in Season 1 before Season 2 begins, where we'll be focusing on our mountain and wetlands biomes. So, without further ado, let's dive into our speed build. So we've got a lot to get through today, so what I'm starting with is our first set of exhibits. Now these currently house frogs, but we're going to be putting insects in there because we're moving our frogs and our axolotls and our Danube Crested Newts into the wetlands area when we get those up and running. With that in mind, this area needs to have a kind of woodlandy walkthrough theme, even though it doesn't quite sit well with the current amphibious animals that we have in here. If that makes any sense at all. I'm planning for the future when we finally put in some bugs and insects into these areas here, because this is all a kind of natural area that has a bit of a modern twist. So we're using logs, we're using the arbor wood, and we're going to be just creating a small timber frame here on this area. The next step is where we bring in the modern twist using the conservation wood paneling that we've become so familiar with because it's so versatile and so useful. I filled in these gaps in between with mulch because I'd quite like them to sort of merge in with the actual habitats themselves so it looks like they are all one big large habitat. Now, into the conservation slats. Now, we're going to make a little curved roof and it's going to have a kind of leaf shape that kind of looks like something a huge leaf had grown all the way over to create this kind of overhang over the actual exhibits themselves. I just kind of messed around with a few different pieces and got them working well, and I was quite happy with the result, and then we duplicated this all the way across to form our basic roof. Now the idea with this is we completely do this one frame here and then duplicate it, rotate it around, and it should fit nicely on the 4 exhibits that are behind us. And it was really easy, really simple, took a little bit of tweaking, but we finally got there in the end. Now, as you can see there's those exhibits in the background as well. This didn't look too good just on its own, so I used some more of the framework just to kind of have it loop back round underneath the actual exhibit itself, and that wood then carries on underneath the actual overhang itself so that it looks like one solid piece. This was a little bit difficult and it did kind of get a little bit like tiny minuscule adjustments, but we finally got there in the end. And then I thought, well, this kind of needs to carry on all the way over the back of the exhibits themselves. And what we can then do is run some foliage right along the back of here so it looks like it's kind of growing through those little wood panels. And I think that would be a really nice touch. Now, I'm not going to be showing you a lot of foliage decoration here today because there's going to be a lot going on, and the more important thing is showing you these structural builds. Once again, those European bridge supports come in to finish off a nice little like base wall on this side. I didn't want them open on this area because guests would start gathering there, so I want to try and hide the view here, and I'll probably end up closing off either side of those exhibits to try and force guests through. We may also do that with the back pieces as well, just in case we get any guests walking down that path to the left there and causing a bit of a nuisance. I then put in a natural wood fence to really portion this one off and make it look like it's the start of our woodland trail. We'll probably mess around with the paths as well and change the style from this cobbled cracked stone into something a little bit more natural perhaps, with the actual like little path signifiers on either side. Took out some path in the middle here. This could become a bit of an issue if we have a lot of guests going through this area, but I imagine as the zoo expands, the actual number of guests using this area will decrease somewhat. and I just wanted to make a nice big plant there in this middle area, which we'll fill with tropical foliage to kind of give this nice little flary touch. It kind of reminds me, there's like a huge, well, it's no longer there, it's been demolished, but where I lived there was this huge area that was kind of like a massive greenhouse that you could go to, and it was a big rainforested area inside, really humid and stuff, and they had huge tropical trees in, something that we don't see a lot in England. It was almost like a little botanical garden. It was actually built as part of a garden festival type thing, and it's now been demolished. Next, our second set of exhibits, which is our axolotls and Danube Crested Newts at the moment. And I really like the idea of using these waterfalls as kind of like a backdrop for that entire exhibit. Now, this might not sit well with our insects when we finally put them in, so I might actually keep a couple of amphibious animals here behind, just because I think that's a really nice touch, rather than just using the stock backgrounds that are available with the Danube Crested Newt and the axolotl, as you can see here. So we put in some plaster work just to begin with our frames, and this looks a little bit weird when you first see it. And I thought it was weird, and it kind of put me off a little bit, but I worked hard to get it working right. We brought in those twilight boards to create a little bit of a support at the bottom, and then added in a top line of support. So guests kind of can see that the water is up against something that's not just glass, and it gives it this nice little frame, so guests can then look under the water and see the animals in there, or look above onto the rock. I just think it adds an extra bit of dimension to that exhibit itself. We then carried on the framework all the way up to the top, giving it a nice bit of solidity to the entire build. This kind of was a little bit of a strange one for me. I had a bit of an idea for what I wanted to achieve, and then I looked at the sides of the buildings and I thought, this doesn't look great, and I didn't want to just do something like run foliage up the side of it. Thankfully, I've kind of discovered these houses that are built in the desert that are kind of like eco houses, and they're like specifically made for desert living. And they have these really nice, huge windows in them. And I thought I'd create something like that for here. They're kind of like miniature greenhouses, but they are designed to harness the heat of the desert and create a truly, fully unique, eco-friendly house. Really cool idea. I really liked it, so I wanted to do a little bit of a nod to it with this build. So we started with our windows, and then we put in some timber frames to add some support. And this still didn't look quite right, but when we finally put the roof on, I was really happy with the end result. And although it looks like a bit of a strange exhibit house, I think it would make a really nice staff building, or we could actually, somewhere else in the zoo, make an eco residence for guests to stay the night, and that would be somewhere else other than this campsite. But this was a really nice little touch, and we ended up filling it with plants and stuff just to make it look used, put a couple of doors on and stuff like that, but you're going to see that in a moment. So it's really difficult sometimes if you don't do these advanced plannings for builds. If you kind of run into these issues, it's hard to make something work, and once you've started it, you kind of don't feel compelled to start again, so you struggle through. Sometimes it helps me to actually struggle through because it forces me to think a little bit more and get creative. Sometimes I just start again after hours of trying to make something work, but this thankfully came through at the 11th hour for me, and it worked out really well, and I was quite happy with it. I'd like to make something like this on a bigger scale so that there's a little bit more room for plants and stuff, and we could make it as part of like a walkthrough area for guests. Of course, the one problem and criticism that I do have is these twilight boards, when you slap them together, they don't have a very nice texture as they overlap. It's like there's a lighter colour on the wood at the edges. It's like a little textural effect that looks really nice on its own, but when you start putting them together, it looks a little bit strange. So that's probably my one criticism. I would maybe replace these with a different kind of wood if I was going to do it again. But yeah, I was happy with how it looked anyway. And yeah, exhibits are always something that I find quite difficult to design. I've seen some really nice ones, but they tend to be like a done thing where they are just kind of part and parcel of something. They don't get integrated a lot. They don't tend to have their own buildings and stuff. So I really like thinking of creative ways to integrate those exhibit little pieces into an actual build itself, rather than just having them in like a big indoors area where there's shops and stuff. I like to have them on their own. So Because we were dealing with some difficult angles here, it took me quite a while to get the door frames and stuff put into place. So I'm going to skip through that. We did fiddle around with these wood pieces, and eventually I think I got something that worked really well. The only problem I have is, once again, this is where the texture disparity in that wood kind of looks a little bit strange. It looks artsy, so we kind of went with it, and as long as the door had a different colour to the actual wood, it pops out and draws the eye enough to not cause too much of an issue. And I'm just going to mention as well, these aren't dedicated pieces, so we don't have to go overboard or gung-ho on the actual detailing on them, because the main draw is going to be the exhibit and the surrounding foliage and stuff, which again, we're not going to be showing much of. I just want to show you the design aspect of the build itself. Corrugated iron roof on this one, because I thought that would be a nice way to use some reclaimed materials and stuff to keep that eco-friendly like walkthrough thing going that we've got. Some nice natural and man-made materials coming into there, lovely little clash of things, and I think it was a really nice idea to use those waterfalls as well. That's something that I'd probably use again. And yeah, the roof looked pretty nice. It was an easy one to put into place, and obviously we just needed to run some framework up the other side to hide those waterfalls, because I don't want them to be seen. I want it to kind of look like there's a cascading water effect on the back of the exhibits themselves, rather than people just seeing the waterfalls. I did also play around with putting some ponds and stuff in the exterior areas, but they didn't really work. Struggled with some barriers like I always do, and I couldn't get the water right. I was going to do something a little bit more creative with the roof here, because there was some overlap, as you can see, but I gave up on that idea very quickly and decided to just find something to cover it up. And this classical plinth worked very nicely, so once again we put that in, we run it all the way across the back of the building so that that top texture is just poking through, and it looks like a really nice deliberate design feature, which of course it isn't. Changed the colour of the roof because I thought the blue stood out a little bit too much, so we made it a little bit of a darker grey colour, and it merges very nicely with the wood that we've got going on there as well. We pulled down this little classical plinth again and then moved on to our woodwork. Now you can see I've already put in a timber frame. There's nothing really to show there. It was pretty basic, exactly the same way I've done it for the rest of this build, and then we ran along these wooden areas as well. Of course, little bit fiddly again, so you're not seeing me do the full whack here. It's just putting in the base stuff, and then I actually put some plaster behind the wood, so it kind of merged in really nicely. It just looks like a little bit of a background, like concrete wall. Why didn't I just use concrete? Because I wanted to colour the plaster the same colour as the wood, so it blended in a little bit better. Here you can see us putting the plaster in. It's just the wall panels because they're a little bit slimmer, and I did have to keep looping round to check that they weren't poking through the exhibits themselves. That was one of the more difficult aspects of making these builds, is making sure that things weren't interfering with the exhibit. Now, moving on to our butterfly walkthrough, the third of our buildings today. We're flying through in this episode because I feel like I'm a bit behind and I've got quite a bit of catching up to do, but also things are getting a little bit more ambitious. So maybe we do need to slow down a little bit and just take it easy and do little bits here and there. But the butterfly habitat is just going to be a large greenhouse with a very basic timber frame on it. We've cleared out all of the actual design aspects of the walkthrough habitat, and we're just building a glass structure here. We're then going to put a timber frame on it, duplicate that whole area, rotate it round so that it forms the other half of the building. One of the easiest things you can do when you're building is design half a building, copy it. As long as it's going to be symmetrical like this one is, you're going to be able to just duplicate it and spin it all the way around. You may need to make a few tweaks to it, but generally you're going to get one building made in half the time, I guess. So the glass framework goes in, and then we came in with, I think we used the classical again. No, it wasn't. It was European timber framework again we pulled in, and we kept it all nice and brilliant white because I thought that was a nice touch. It makes it stand out a lot more, especially when we've got it against the green background of what is going to be some heavy tree coverage. As this is like a little bit of a woodland walkway, I wanted to really cover the area in trees, and the only difference we have in here other than the European trees is in those two areas we've got some tropical trees thrown in there as well, which may have been a little bit of a mistake on my part because the tropical stuff is going to be heavily focused within the wetlands area and not necessarily this one, but it actually does give a nice little break from the heavily wooded areas of European trees that can look a little bit boring when you're looking at them from afar. Put in some more of these classical wooden pieces changed the colour so there was a nice little bit of a frame there, and that just gave it a nice little bit of contrast in between the two colours and the types of timber, and then started running this all the way along. Now we did have to kind of box this out, so I made it a bit more of a three-dimensional shape because it wasn't sticking through the other side. So as you can see, we duplicate and spin it around and then put a little bit of a lip on the top of these, and that formed the base work of this actual building. This only appears on the lower section, and it's only on this little bit of an entrance like lobby area that we've created. We spun that all the way around. As you can see, I missed a few out there when I was duplicating stuff, so I had to go back and do it again. That happens a lot to me. You don't see it all the time, but there it is now. Proof that I do make a lot of mistakes when I'm building stuff. This was actually quite fiddly, and it took me a while, so we are just going to show you the basic stuff. You're going to see me designing some of the framework, and then we're going to skip ahead and you'll see the finished piece. We are going to do a little bit more foliage work, so the next part of the video, you'll have seen that in the backgrounds there's a load more already done. I've got the campsite to build next, which is the next part of it, and then you'll see us doing some finishing touches to the foliage. Now, if you do want to see some more foliage building, I'll definitely be doing that when I actually focus once again on habitats. I've got a couple of areas planned. The campsite, I'd quite like to do a giant otter habitat right in the middle there, so it's like a little otter sanctuary within this campsite, because the otters, they kind of fit in with the wetlands biome, and this campsite area is going to have like a little hidden walkway that takes you into the other side of the wetlands biome. We have one from the entrance that like duels up with entering to the mountain area and the wetlands area, but this is just going to specifically walk through nice wooded areas right into our wetlands biome. So this is actually walkthrough habitats for two types of butterflies. We've got the cloudless sulphur, and it's not the monarch butterfly, but there is another one in there. I can't remember which one we've got in. I do have all types of butterflies, and they do need like a home, so I may actually have this when we transition into the wetlands area from the back of the campsite here. We might end up putting in another couple of butterfly species so that they're all kind of looped up in this entrance area. Next up, we're going to be moving into our campsite, and we're going to design some nice modern log cabins that resemble static caravans, which are so popular in the UK. And I'll talk a little bit more about them when we get into it. Now, it was at this point in the recording session that I realised I'd maybe bitten off a little bit more than I could chew, and that this video was going to take a lot more of your time than I would like it to. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some prep work, and we're going to complete the campsite in another episode. So you will remember this building from the entrance when I originally built it, and I always wanted to bring it back and use it again, so that's what we're going to do. It is forming part of the campsite that's actually going to be like an otter sanctuary for the giant otters. As this is kind of like a wetlands campsite, I wanted to do something a little bit wetlands themed so that we could start merging this with the main wetlands area. So we've got a nice big pile of seating here for the animal talks. We're just fleshing that out now, and then we're going to put in some basic foundational structures. We're not fully decorating this building. That's going to come in another episode, because I don't really want to merge two different things together in one big go. So you can see us putting in some toilets and some food and drink facilities in here just to finish it all off, and then we'll just leave it and move on. Obviously, I'm going to be showing you a couple of other bits and pieces that I do here as well. You can see we've already got a nice big tank in there for guests to come and view the otters when they're diving into their pool, and then there will be an exterior area that's actually going to be a restaurant, and I'm literally just going to mark out where that's going to be. Obviously, because this is a campsite, it's going to be places where, you know, we can have shower blocks and stuff like that, all the usual things you would get in campsites, but that's too much to do in the one video, so that's going to come at another time. I am still going to show you the build process of the little log cabin type things that I'm building. They are going to have like one kind of basic design that we can then recolor, change a few things around, location of doors and the little verandas that are on the sides and stuff, with no fences to begin with, and then I can put in some fences, make a few variations, and then we'll scatter them out throughout this new caravan camping site. One little tip though, if you're going to do floors on mass buildings like this and you want to actually duplicate a number of items in one go to fit them in, pop down a 4 meter like concrete block like this, and then put your tiles or your wood or whatever in place, and then just decorate them all like I'm doing here. Then highlight them, duplicate the actual concrete block, and then you can move them all around like so. Really easy, really quick, and it saves a lot of time in adjusting. Then you just highlight all of the blocks again and drop them down, then remove the concrete slabs. And then you just do your little like like tiny little detailing at the end, like I'm doing right here. And that kind of gives it this really nice pool-based floor, because this used to be a swimming pool, I guess. The guests don't get swimming pools on this campsite now. It's being used by the otters. Leave them alone. And this is going to be the area where the otters can get out of their pool into the outdoor kind of backstage area, where that's going to be some like open kind of grazing area. And then this building here is going to be a restaurant with a backstage area in it, where people are going to be able to eat and view the otters outside and stuff like that. So that is our fleshed out area that we're going to develop later on. On to our little log cabins here. So we're starting with a concrete foundation, and the idea is that these are caravans that could be moved to other sites or like swapped out and upgraded and things like that. They're not actual log cabins. Now in the UK we have a number of like caravan parks. They do look, if you're from the US, they're very similar to like trailer parks and stuff, but they're more of a like a resort than actual like a year-round living kind of quarters. So this is what we're kind of fleshing out here. We're putting in some plastic roofing with some nice timber framework, and then they'll have like doors and windows and stuff on like that. And they usually sleep, you know, you can sleep up to about 6 in them, and they're pretty nice. I've stayed in a few of them, and they're a really cool little like getaway if you're wanting to go somewhere in the UK. They tend to be quite popular around like seaside resorts and things like that. So that's what we're trying to create here. They have like little verandas and stuff. There's normally like a car parking space and things like that. And it also gives us the opportunity, because I've noticed that my current entrance, even though I've just redeveloped it, is quite overcrowded. So this gives us an opportunity to bring in some new spawners and have 2 separate entrances to the zoo. One on the kind of like central area and another on this area as well. And obviously the road that we've got is going to extend all the way along here as well. And that'll give us an opportunity to create another car park, which is specifically for this little camping site, which I thought was a really nice idea. I'm also going to do a little bit of terraforming, which you'll see here, because I'd like the road to kind of disappear naturally into a tunnel, and then we would imagine it would go beneath the ground and pop out somewhere else. And it just means that it looks like that this space has been created nicely. We have a metro access in the main entrance, and then this secondary entrance is going to have like maybe a bus, or we could put spawners within some of these buildings so that guests spawn in them and come out of them and then pay the entrance fee into the zoo, either at the butterfly enclosure or going into the wetlands area. So we're looking at ways to constantly change how this the guests in this zoo interact with the space. And once that's put in, really simple, we can then move on. So we're putting in our terraforming work here, and I always now start, if I'm going to build anything on height, I use the terrain stamps just to give me that extra like bit of height right from the off. And then we can play around with the smooth tool, and then we've got that initial platform to work on. That's when we start doing the more detailed terraforming stuff using our increase height, decrease height, and then the smoothing tools and all of that other sort of stuff that we get in. Now this is really sped up, and I wanted this to be quite simple because it's not actually part of this main episode. I just want to get a little bit of a base coat in because we want to work out the build area that we're going to have when we finally get round to expanding this. And now you can kind of see where I'm thinking I've bit off more than I can chew, because this was only meant to be development of exhibits, and suddenly we're moving on and building this huge campsite and stuff. So maybe some poor episode planning on my part, but I wanted to leave it in nonetheless so that you can see the kind of mistakes in the creative process that I'm going through and trying to kind of get back on track, where I'm a little bit rusty after the Christmas period, but I think it's important to show it nonetheless, and you do get to see a little bit of the development, and it means that next time we get round to that next episode, there's going to be a little bit more that we can do and fit into that as we continue to flesh this area out. So I've got a really nice base here, and I want to add a little bit more height onto this area because this is where the road is going to go under, cutting into this mountain and going off into the distance back to like a main city or what have you. So this is probably going to get developed a little bit as we go on, and that was that. So now I'm going to show you a little bit of foliage. Now I didn't want to do a lot of this because it wasn't the main focus of the episode. This was all about building those exhibits. So if you've watched this far, thank you very much. Do drop a subscribe if this is your first episode. That'll be really, really helpful. It hasn't been my best work, I will admit, but I am, like I said, a little bit rusty. And the foliage here, because we're so cramped, the camera work got a little bit weird, so I haven't left too much of this in, but you're getting the idea. Where we've got this dense forested area that I wanted to create in this exhibit walkthrough, we just put in little touches of foliage on the ground level because we are going to be viewing parts of this zoo at guest height. Now, I could have just left it and not done anything, but that doesn't sit right with me. I have to have these things really well decorated and lots of detailing done. So we're creating some nice blankets of foliage throughout, and obviously you're not going to see me do it for the entire area, just some of the key points, and then it will be duplicated, moved around, more stuff will be added in so that we get good coverage on all of these areas. And that's what I'm going to be doing off camera when I develop the actual tour for the next episode. You can see us here as well now filling in those gaps in the original, like, first exhibits that we come to, with some nice lava vines and then a few other bits and pieces, elephant ear plants and stuff, all tropical things. And I may even put in a few misters because we want to create the illusion that this area has to be looked after and in the correct humidity temperatures, otherwise these like plants will just die. They're tropical plants, they're not in their native area, so we need to make sure that they're well looked after. And that's one of the difficulties that I had with making the decision that I made earlier in the episode to put tropical plants just in the open like that. I kind of get the idea that these things should all be in little greenhouses or something, or behind some glass, so that we could monitor the temperature and humidity within. But I'm leaving it as it is for now because I think it adds a nice little touch to it, and it really helps me to flesh out these builds. Putting in some mossy rocks as well, just so that it doesn't look like it's all put on mulch, and then obviously we would duplicate these areas and put them all the way around into the main, the opposite kind of area. Putting in our finishing touches with some exhibit education boards. These ones are jutting out kind of like at face height so that guests can read them as they look, and the other ones in the first set of exhibits are a little bit lower down. Now, you will be wondering why I haven't fully developed the butterfly walkthrough, and that's because I don't have all of the research. So if there are specific enrichment items in there that I need to use, I don't want them to interfere with foliage and things like that. So I'm going to do the research and stuff off camera, and then I'm going to develop that in time for our end of season tour. Last thing to do was to put in some educational speakers, and that's going to be redeveloped all the way through the zoo because I'm aware that I haven't done a lot of work on those things in other parts, and once again that'll be finished by next season. So we are almost at the tour section of this video. I just want to thank you all again for watching. If this is your first time, do feel free to drop me a subscribe. We're closing in on 1,000 subs, which is crazy to me right now that people are coming here and finding this interesting, and I'm very grateful for it. Enjoy the tour, guys, and I will see you in next week's episode. Thanks for watching.
Brauchst du einen Penner?